They said, she's changed. Yes, she had. The day she wrapped that hijab around her head, something inside her shifted forever. It wasn't just fabric resting on her hair, it was faith settling in her heart. She wasn't looking for validation from the world anymore. She was responding to a much higher call, one that whispered to her soul every time she looked in the mirror and felt the emptiness of trying to please everyone but her Lord. She wore it with trembling hands but a firm heart. She knew the stares would come. She knew the questions, the assumptions, the judgment they'd all follow. But she also knew something else. When you cover for the sake of Allah, He uncovers parts of you you never knew were broken and begins to heal them. That moment didn't just change how she dressed. It changed how she walked, how she prayed, how she saw herself. It gave her dignity this world couldn't offer, confidence no filter could create, and peace no one could take away. She wasn't trying to be perfect, she was trying to be sincere. And when she chose Allah, with all her fears and flaws, Allah chose her heart, purified it, protected it, and began writing a new story just for her. She didn't take that step because she had everything figured out. She took it because her heart couldn't ignore the call any longer. It wasn't pressure, it wasn't fear. It was something much deeper, a quiet pull toward her Lord, a whisper that said, now is the time. That morning as she stood in front of the mirror, it wasn't about the cloth, it was about courage. She didn't feel ready, but she was willing. And that willingness meant more to Allah than perfection ever could. Her hands trembled, her heart raced. She knew this choice might make her stand out, but she also knew it would draw her closer to the one who truly sees her. She wasn't trying to impress people, she was trying to please her Creator. There were doubts, there were fears. She asked herself, what if I fail? What if I'm not consistent? But she remembered Allah doesn't expect perfection. He loves those who try, those who turn to Him even in their weakness. As she stepped outside, she felt the weight of 1,000 stares. But she also felt something else, peace. Not because everything was easy, but because her heart was finally aligned with her faith. She expected criticism, and yes, it came. But what she didn't expect was the internal strength that began to grow. With every step, her confidence wasn't in herself, it was in the one she chose to walk with. Her hijab didn't make her perfect overnight, but it reminded her every single day of her intention. It pulled her back to prayer. It softened her speech. It helped her become more conscious of her actions. She didn't wear it to claim superiority. She wore it to show submission. It was her quiet way of saying, I belong to Allah. And that statement, even without words, had a beauty that only sincerity can carry. Not everyone understood her decision. Some questioned it, some mocked it. But her goal wasn't to be understood by the world, it was to be seen by the one who created her soul. Each day wasn't perfect. There were moments of weakness, times she thought of giving up, but somehow she kept going. And every time she chose to continue, her step became purer because it was driven by faith, not fear. The hijab didn't erase her struggles, but it became a symbol of her resilience. It reminded her that progress doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just about continuing even when it's hard. She smiled more, now not because life got easier, but because her heart was lighter. She was no longer battling between her values and her appearance. She had aligned them, and that brought peace. Yes, she had flaws. Yes, she still slipped. But now she had something that constantly reminded her of who to return to. Her hijab was not just a covering, it was a compass. People told her it would hold her back, but she found the opposite. Her decision empowered her. It gave her dignity. It reminded her that modesty is not weakness, it's strength wrapped in humility. Some days she wore it boldly, some days she wore it with trembling, but no matter how she wore it for Him. And that consistency through all emotions made it sincere. There were days she cried, days she wanted to blend in again, but those were the same days she prayed harder, and in those prayers she found the strength to keep holding on. She realized that wearing hijab wasn't the final step, it was the first of many, a beginning, not an end. It opened her heart to more acts of obedience. more self-reflection, more closeness to her Lord. When she looked back, she didn't see a perfect journey. She saw a journey marked by struggle, growth and grace. And that gave her hope, because Islam is not about never falling. It's about always returning. What made her effort beautiful wasn't that she never doubted. It was that she never gave up. Her sincerity, her effort, her tears, they were all seen by the one who rewards the unseen. So yes, her first step wasn't perfect, but it was pure. And in the eyes of Allah, that purity, that intention, that moment of bravery was more powerful than a lifetime of hesitation. At first, it felt like just a physical change, a simple cloth over her head. But slowly she began to realize that this was something much deeper. Her hijab wasn't just on her body, it was awakening something inside her heart. It wasn't just what she wore, it was who she was becoming. She used to feel lost in the noise of the world. But the moment she wore hijab for Allah, the noise began to fade. She could finally hear herself think, feel her heart soften, and notice the stillness that came from choosing sincerity over social pressure. The world expected her to dress up for attention, but when she dressed for Allah, she discovered a peace no one else could give. It wasn't about hiding, it was about protecting something sacred, something precious, her dignity and her soul. Every time she stepped outside, she felt a new kind of strength. Not because she wanted to be seen as strong, but because she knew who she was walking with. That connection gave her comfort even in a world that didn't understand her decision. It surprised her how peace came in layers. The more she let go of pleasing people, the more her heart clung to Allah. And in that quiet space between hesitation and conviction, she found calmness she had been searching for. Her hijab became a reminder. With every glance in the mirror, she whispered to herself, "You are not doing this for them." That gentle statement anchored her heart again and again in the ocean of His mercy. She thought the hijab would make her feel restricted, but it had the opposite effect. It freed her from the need to constantly prove herself to others. She no longer dressed for approval, she dressed for purpose. Strangely, the more she covered, the more she felt seen, but by the one who matters most. She didn't need compliments to feel beautiful. She needed contentment. And Allah placed that contentment in her heart. The hijab changed the way she walked, the way she spoke, even the way she thought. Not because it forced her, but because it reminded her of who she represents. It brought her closer to the character of a woman of faith. There were days she struggled, days she questioned herself, but through it all, one thing remained: a sense of peace that she couldn't explain. A peace that came from obedience, quiet, steady and pure. She began to love her modesty. It wasn't about fashion anymore. It was about her identity. Her hijab told the world she belonged to her Lord first, and that gave her a sense of confidence nothing else could. Some thought she was forced. Some thought she was oppressed. But only she knew the truth. This was her choice, her journey, her connection to the one who knows her better than she knows herself. When people walked past with judgment in their eyes, she smiled gently. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she'd found something far greater than their approval. She'd found a relationship with her Creator. The hijab was never meant to be a burden. It was a shield, a beautiful barrier that reminded her to carry herself with grace, to choose her words carefully, to remember her worth in every setting. She no longer measured peace by how accepted she was in a crowd. She measured it by how calm her heart felt when she stood alone, knowing that Allah was pleased with her sincerity. Even when it got difficult, she didn't turn back. Because every time she wore her hijab, she felt herself stepping deeper into purpose, into a version of herself that was becoming more conscious, more grateful, more whole. She used to wonder if she was good enough. But wearing hijab taught her something valuable. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest with yourself and consistent with your intention. What she covered on the outside taught her how to protect what was inside. Her hijab wasn't just a cloth, it was a teacher. A quiet reminder to keep her soul clean, her heart soft, and her intentions pure. Some people wear the hijab with fear of judgment. She wore it with hope of forgiveness. And that hope is what kept her walking through the tests, knowing that every sincere effort is seen and rewarded. So yes, she wore hijab on the outside, but what she gained was far more than modest clothing. She gained peace on the inside, purpose in her step, and a deeper connection to the one who never stops guiding sincere hearts. She used to check the mirror not just for her reflection, but to imagine how others might see her. Her self-worth was tied to opinions, compliments, and acceptance. But all of that changed the day she realized those people could never give her what only Allah could. Peace. There came a moment when she stopped dressing to impress and started dressing to express her faith. She no longer felt the need to meet every standard around her. The only standard that mattered now was, is Allah pleased with me? Validation had kept her tired. Every day was a performance. But when she redirected her intentions, when she turned her heart toward Jannah, she felt a freedom she'd never known. She no longer needed applause. She needed Allah's mercy. It wasn't easy. Walking away from the craving of attention felt like walking into the unknown. But her soul began to breathe again. And in the silence of being unseen, she discovered the beauty of being known by Allah. She had been chasing comments and likes. Now she chased contentment and light. She chose to replace their approval with His acceptance. And with every quiet act of obedience, she felt herself getting closer to the destination that truly mattered, Jannah. When she stopped asking, do they like me? And started asking, is Allah pleased with me? That's when everything began to shift. Her confidence wasn't shaken anymore. It was anchored in something eternal. The world taught her to seek beauty for validation. Islam taught her to seek beauty for gratitude. She stopped performing and started transforming. Her goal was no longer to fit in, but to rise spiritually. She realized that the ones she once wanted to impress would not stand with her on the day of judgment. And those whose words hurt her, they had no say in her destination. Only Allah does. That clarity gave her strength. People's love can fade. Their opinions change. But Allah's mercy remains. She began to live for the one whose approval brings peace in this life and reward in the next. She was finally aiming for something greater. She didn't stop caring, she just started caring about the right things. She prayed not to be seen, but to stay connected. She wore hijab not to conform, but to submit. Every action now carried meaning beyond the surface. Before she wanted to be noticed, now she wanted to be forgiven. Her priorities flipped and her soul became lighter. She no longer felt the need to chase the crowd. She was walking a different path now, one that led upward. When friends pulled away because of her choices, she didn't beg them to stay. She knew that seeking Allah sometimes means losing people. And even in that loss there is gain, because what is with Allah is always better. She had once been afraid of being forgotten by people, but now she feared being forgotten by Allah. That shift made her speak less but mean more, act quietly but impact deeply, live simply but purposefully. No longer did she dress to compete. She dressed with modesty and peace. Her outfits weren't about trends, they were about values. And each one reminded her of her real identity. A servant walking toward her Lord. Even in moments of doubt, she kept her eyes on Jannah. That was her focus, that was her fuel. When people discouraged her, she turned to dua. When people judged her, she turned to prayer. She wasn't perfect, but she was intentional. Every effort she made was rooted in sincerity. Every step forward, though shaky, was real. And Allah, the most loving, was guiding her through it all. She didn't wear her faith loudly, but she carried it consistently. That consistency mattered more than any post or picture. It was a private bond between her heart and her Creator, and nothing could shake that. Choosing Jannah didn't mean she gave up this world. It meant she prioritized the next one. She smiled more, complained less, and trusted more deeply. Her peace wasn't tied to the moment, it was tied to eternity. She found her value not in how many noticed her, but in how many moments she remembered Allah. That became her definition of success, not popularity, but piety, not fame, but forgiveness. So yes, the day she stopped seeking validation from people and started seeking Jannah from Allah was the day she found herself. And in that moment, she didn't just change direction, she found her destination. They looked at her and assumed she was being silenced. They called it restriction. But what they didn't know was that her hijab was her voice. It spoke her values before she ever said a word. It was her way of saying, I belong to no one but Allah. She heard their whispers. Poor girl, they said. But she smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because she knew something they didn't. What they saw as imprisonment was actually her freedom from society's endless demands. They thought she was hidden, but she was protected. The hijab didn't erase her identity, it revealed her dignity. It reminded her that she is more than appearances, more than trends, more than opinions. Every layer she wrapped around her head was not just cloth, it was courage. It was a declaration of independence from a world obsessed with showing everything, saying she didn't need to prove anything to be worthy. She wasn't afraid of standing out, she was afraid of losing herself. The hijab kept her grounded. In a world that told her to reveal more, she chose to guard more. And in that decision, she found peace. They called her oppressed without ever asking her story. But her story was one of strength, of awakening, of submission, not to culture, but to the Creator. She wore it proudly, not for them, but despite them. Her hijab was not a cage, it was a shield from objectification, from shallow expectations, from a world that often valued women only for how they looked. It allowed her to be seen for her character, not her curves. She didn't need to display everything to feel empowered. Her power was in her modesty. Her quiet confidence confused those who thought self-worth could only be found in skin-deep approval. The irony was bitter. The same society that claimed to liberate women still told them how to dress. But she had broken free from all of that. Her hijab was a decision, not forced, not feared, but chosen from the heart. They asked, "Don't you feel suffocated?" She replied, "I feel protected." What covered her physically uncovered a strength in her spiritually. She didn't need the world's version of freedom, she had Allah's version. She learned early on, not everyone would understand her choice, and that was okay. She wasn't living for their understanding, she was living for His acceptance. And that made all the difference. Even in the hottest days, when it wasn't easy, she remembered that her reward was not in comfort, it was in obedience. Her hijab became a badge of honor, not a burden, a quiet act of resistance, and a bold act of devotion. She didn't wear hijab to hide, she wore it to rise. Every step she took reminded her that Allah was with her, and His protection was worth every test, every comment, every challenge. While others changed themselves to be seen, she changed herself to be unseen by the wrong eyes. Her modesty wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. A daily reminder that she was not for display, but for respect. She didn't need to argue, her actions spoke louder. Her presence, covered yet confident, said more than any debate could. Her serenity baffled those who couldn't understand how covering more brought her closer to peace. The more they misunderstood her, the more she understood herself. She wasn't living in chains, she was walking in purpose. And purpose gave her more freedom than the world could ever offer. She remembered the women of the past, strong, dignified, devout. They too were judged. Yet history remembers their strength, not the opinions of their critics. She stood among them, proud to follow their path. When they said, "Take it off, you'll be free," she replied, "I found freedom the day I put it on." Her hijab gave her boundaries that protected her soul. It reminded her that she was sacred, not for public consumption. No matter how modern the world became, she held on, because truth doesn't expire. And her hijab was a truth she carried on her head, and in her heart, a reminder of who she was and who she belonged to. So while the world called it oppression, she called it protection. Not just from the eyes of others, but from the need to be anything other than what Allah created her to be. And in that surrender, she found strength, peace and honor. She never needed to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence wrapped in modesty was enough. Without saying a word, she declared, "I know my worth." And that silent strength silenced more opinions than arguments ever could. They spoke loudly about what she should wear, how she should act, what was considered normal. But she remained firm. Her modesty was her response, a gentle but unwavering no to everything that didn't align with her values. Her clothes didn't scream for attention, but her character left a lasting impression. She didn't rely on appearance to define her identity. Her faith did that. And in that quiet confidence, she found her voice. Opinions changed daily. One day they praised her strength, the next they questioned her choices. But her modesty never wavered. It wasn't built on trends or approval. It was built on conviction and love for her Creator. She didn't wear modesty for show. It wasn't a costume, it was a daily decision made for the one who sees every effort, every struggle, every intention. And in that, she found real power, the kind that doesn't need to be explained. Some misunderstood her silence. But her modesty was never about hiding, it was about honoring herself. She wasn't quiet because she lacked words. She was quiet because her actions were already speaking. Her hijab didn't just cover her, it uplifted her. It reminded her to walk with grace, to lower her gaze, to speak with kindness. These small intentional acts became louder than any public declaration. She didn't argue with those who didn't understand. She knew that real change doesn't come from debates, it comes from consistency. And her consistency in modesty became her lifelong dawah. The beauty of her modesty wasn't in what she wore, but in why she wore it. Not to impress, not to blend in, but to obey. And that reason gave her the strength to stand alone, even in crowds. They tried to define her value by how much of her they could see, but she flipped the script. She defined her value by how much of her she preserved. That alone made her different, and in a good way. Her silence was powerful. It carried meaning, boundaries, and depth. While others used noise to prove a point, she used her dignity to make one. And even those who didn't agree had to respect it. There were days she felt weak, but her modesty reminded her she was never walking alone. Every step she took in obedience echoed louder in the heavens than the voices that tried to bring her down. She didn't need likes to feel validated. She didn't need trends to feel beautiful. She needed one thing, Allah's approval. And in seeking that, her modesty became a form of silent worship. People love to speak, but their words pass. Her intention remained. While their opinions changed like the wind, her modesty stayed like the mountain, still strong and rooted in purpose. She knew modesty wasn't just what she wore. It was how she carried herself, her speech, her walk, her presence. All of it was part of the package, and each part reflected her inner peace. There were days when the comments hurt, but those were the days she remembered why she started. Not for them, not for image, but for Him. And that reason alone was enough to keep her going. The world called it extreme. She called it commitment. And that commitment was what kept her anchored, even when the tides of society tried to pull her in every direction. Every time she chose modesty over trends, she grew stronger. Not in appearance, but in spirit. She began to feel lighter, clearer, more focused on her purpose rather than her image. She was living proof that you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to reveal to be respected. You just need to be sincere. And her sincerity echoed in ways no words ever could. So while they kept talking, she kept walking quietly, consistently toward her Lord. And in that walk, her modesty became her statement, a timeless message that said, I am enough because Allah says I am. When she chose to cover, it wasn't because she had life all figured out. It was because she was finally choosing Allah over everything else. That single act became the beginning of a journey, one that would shape her strength, her identity, and her peace. She used to think strength meant standing tall in front of others. But real strength, she learnt, was about standing firm in front of her Lord. Every layer she wore reminded her, strength isn't in showing more, it's in submitting fully. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly As she covered her head, she began to uncover her soul. She started protecting her eyes, guarding her speech, and walking with purpose. That was strength the world didn't see, but Allah did. Some days she questioned herself. But even on her weakest days, her hijab reminded her that she was trying. And in that effort, she found a quiet strength, not loud, not boastful, but real and lasting. People saw her fabric and misunderstood it. What they didn't realize was that beneath the cloth was a woman growing stronger, more connected, more resilient, not because of the cloth, but because of the conviction it carried. She wasn't trying to prove a point, she was just trying to please her Creator. But in doing so, she discovered a confidence that no crowd could give and no critic could take away. Her hijab became more than a symbol, it became her reminder. Every time she doubted herself, it whispered, "You've come this far, keep going." And that encouragement, though silent, gave her the strength to rise again. Even when others stared, even when she felt alone, she remembered she wasn't walking for them. She was walking for the one who sees every silent sacrifice. And that gave her more courage than approval ever could. As she grew stronger inside, her world outside began to change too. She made better choices, deeper friendships, and clearer boundaries. Not because she was perfect, but because she was becoming more mindful. She didn't always feel brave, but wearing hijab reminded her that bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's walking toward Allah despite it. That's when she realized she was stronger than she ever knew. Her strength wasn't found in arguments or explanations. It was found in her quiet refusal to give up, to keep wearing it, even when it was hard, even when people misunderstood, even when she felt tested. She learned to rise without noise. Her prayers became deeper, her trust in Allah stronger, and the hijab that once felt unfamiliar became her shield, protecting not just her body, but her heart. In a world that pushed for exposure, she chose coverage, not out of shame, but out of reverence. And that choice, made repeatedly, built resilience in her that the world could not recognize. She stopped looking for strength in others. Instead, she found it in her sujood, in her quiet dua, in her ability to walk away from what displeased Allah. Those small acts made her mighty. The strength Allah gave her wasn't visible to everyone, but it was deeply rooted. It showed in how she stayed kind when judged, how she forgave when hurt, and how she kept going when things got heavy. Her beauty was no longer measured by skin, it was measured by sincerity. And that inner beauty radiated through her modesty, creating a presence that could be felt, not just seen. She stopped being afraid of being different. She realized that being different for the right reason is a blessing. And her strength grew every time she chose faith over comfort. Sometimes strength looks like a woman who prays through tears, who wears hijab even when her heart is heavy, who puts Allah first, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Each test became a new layer of strength, and Allah, in His mercy, kept lifting her higher. Her modesty wasn't a barrier to success, it was the very reason she was finding true success. So yes, when she covered herself for Allah, He uncovered something greater inside her. Strength, a strength rooted in faith, built by struggle and rewarded by peace. And no one could ever take that away from her. She was told hijab would hold her back, that it would keep her from achieving her dreams. But the opposite happened. The day she wore it for the sake of Allah, she didn't shrink, she rose. Her purpose became clearer than ever before. They thought she'd lose her voice, but hijab gave her a new one, not loud, but rooted in values. She spoke through her character, her presence, her integrity. And her words were now backed by something far deeper, conviction. She didn't stop growing when she wore hijab. She started growing properly. The kind of growth that begins inside, in how you see yourself, in who you aim to please, and in the peace you carry even in storms. What people thought was a limitation was actually a filter. Hijab filtered out distractions, filtered out shallow relationships, and filtered her focus back to what mattered, her journey to Allah. She began to walk differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet honor. She knew her value didn't come from attention but from intention. And hijab reminded her of that every single day. They said she wouldn't be accepted. But she didn't want to be accepted by a world that changes its values every season. She chose to be accepted by the one who never changes. Hijab didn't erase her skills, her dreams, or her ambitions. It refined them. It aligned them with purpose. She stopped chasing what was temporary and started investing in what was eternal. People assumed she wore it because she was afraid. But fear never fueled her hijab, love did. And love for Allah lifts the heart in ways the world can never understand. She felt stronger now, not just because of the cloth on her head, but because of what it reminded her of, that she was never alone, and that her choices carried weight in the sight of her Lord. The hijab didn't slow her down, it protected her pace. It helped her run toward her goals without being pulled aside by the need for attention or approval. She was focused, and it showed. Before hijab, she constantly worried about fitting in. After hijab, she started focusing on standing out, not for the world's gaze, but for Allah's pleasure. That change lifted her in ways she never expected. It didn't make her invisible, it made her seen by the right eyes. Those who respected her values, who appreciated her strength, and who understood that modesty was a mark of dignity, not weakness. When her heart felt low, hijab reminded her why she started. It lifted her spiritually. When the world felt heavy, it brought her back to her why. And from there, her how always followed. She didn't need to be loud to prove her strength. The strength was already wrapped in every fold of her hijab, a symbol of her daily fight to choose purpose over pressure. The world told her to reveal everything. Hijab taught her that what's sacred is meant to be protected. That lesson elevated her self-worth and silenced every voice that told her she wasn't enough. Her hijab made her rise above trends. While others changed with the seasons, she stood firm in timeless values. And that kind of strength isn't found in stores, it's found in faith. She found new doors, opening ones she didn't know existed. Respect came from unexpected places. Support came from sincere souls. And her confidence wasn't borrowed, it was built. They thought hijab was about covering. She knew it was about revealing discipline, devotion, and direction. The kind of beauty that grows from the soul, not the surface. Even when it was hard, even when tears fell, she held on to it. Because she knew what it gave her: honor, humility, and a connection to Allah that nothing else had brought her. So no, hijab didn't limit her, it lifted her. It lifted her mindset, her modesty, her mission. And through that lift, she didn't rise to the world's expectations, she rose to meet her Lord's. You see, it was never about being seen, it was about being sincere. She didn't wear the hijab because she had it all figured out. She wore it because she was figuring it out with Allah. Every strand she covered was a whisper to her Creator, I choose you. And that choice, it didn't go unnoticed. The world may continue to judge her journey, but her journey is not for them. It's between her and the one who sees every struggle, every sacrifice, every silent prayer. And when you walk toward Him, even trembling, He runs toward you with mercy. So if you're standing at that same crossroads, wondering if you're ready, wondering if you're worthy, remember, it's not about perfection, it's about direction. And the moment you choose Him with your heart, your steps will start to follow. May Allah give all of us the strength to rise, to return, and to dress our hearts with taqwa, just as we dress our bodies with modesty. Ameen.